The way our grandchildren will speak in the future is going to get weird, and it's going to affect geopolitics. Hello, everyone. Mark Heck coming to you from British Columbia. It feels like summer has finally arrived here, so I'm feeling pretty happy. Okay, except every now and then I get some doofus in the comment section telling me that I'm mispronouncing some word or phrase, which got me thinking about languages, and specifically how language is changing quite rapidly in North America and then where it's going. So, first of all, we have to recognize that languages change. Second, some languages change faster than others. And third, this is actually the most important point, the diversity of languages is correlated with biodiversity. Now, this shocking phenomenon was actually discovered about 150 years ago and mostly forgotten until quite recently. Charles Darwin commented on it back in the 1800s, as did Alfred Russel Wallace, the father of biogeography. They both noticed that there seemed to be more languages in biologically diverse landscapes and less languages in less biologically diverse landscapes. Another way of saying that is that whenever you have a place with lots of plants and animal species, you'll have people speaking lots of different languages. But the phenomenon was mostly ignored until around the 1990s when some scholars took another look at it. A woman named Louisa Maffei, who actually lives right over there on that island, Salt Spring Island, plus some others such as the famous ethnobotanist Wade Davis, began to reawaken the world to this phenomenon. The phenomenon that 70% of the world's 7,000 languages are found in the same areas as high biodiversity. And this is essentially how it works. Geography creates biodiversity. The more complex the geography, the greater the biodiversity, and the biodiversity is correlated with language diversity. So the more diversity, the more language diversity. And the more languages, the more cultures, and well, the more cultures, the more complicated the politics. So Papua New Guinea is probably the best example. It's an incredibly mountainous island with the highest levels of biological diversity on planet Earth. It has 840 of the world's 7,000 languages. Geography, climate, and distance from the equator play the biggest roles. Mountains close to the equator usually have more biodiversity than flatlands away from the equator. And they'll inevitably have more human languages. Now, it's not always that simple. Like a web of complex waterways, sloughs, swamps, and keys like you'd find in Florida fits the bill. Florida is one of the world's top biodiversity hotspots. It has over 700 native land animal species. Greenland, by comparison, which is mostly ice, has extreme temperature variation and is a long way away from the equator. It has only 7 native land animal species: muskox, caribou, Arctic fox, Arctic hare, a northern lemming, an ermine, and a polar bear. That's it. So Florida is diverse, Greenland is not. And no surprise, Florida also had a high diversity of native languages prior to European arrival. Now, I don't know what the number was, but it was apparently quite a lot. Greenland, by comparison, has only one native language, Greenlandic. So it's got 7 animal species and 1 human language. Cold, long way from the equator, not a very diverse place. But that's the basic phenomenon. High biodiversity is correlated with high language diversity. Okay, so what does that all mean for our future here in North America? Well, this phenomenon gives us a hint about where we're going linguistically. So let's keep it simple and imagine that there's a really big country that had really high linguistic diversity at one time. Let's say 375 different languages. And then something happened. All the languages were wiped out and only one was left. So based on the biolinguistic phenomenon, we know that over time, that big country would slowly see the natural creation of new languages until eventually it got back to 375. And then that's where it would level out. And this is actually happening in North America right now. So let's just zoom into the mid to high latitudes, or what is essentially Canada, for a second to see how this is all playing out in more detail. So before European arrival, there were almost 100 native languages. And of those, 60 were on the western side, or west of the Rocky Mountains, in what is essentially British Columbia today. The other 40 were on the other side, east, spread out across the rest of the land. And as you can see from the map, the languages were unevenly distributed in a pretty big way. One small area had most of the languages, the mountainous area. And the ringer is that biological diversity follows the same pattern. 60% of Canada's plant and animal species are found clustered on the western side of that line as well, 40% to the east. That's the phenomenon. The diversity of plants and animals overlaps human languages. So let's imagine that Canadians got to the point where they only spoke one language, English. They wiped out all those pesky indigenous languages. They managed to get those damn Quebecers to finally speak English once and for all, and forced all the immigrants to speak English as well. So they got down to just one language they could all speak, and oh, wouldn't that be nice and easy? Well, we know that over time, like a game of whack-a-mole, 100 new languages will pop back up. Slowly at first, then rapidly. And eventually, 60 of them would be on the west side of the dividing line and 40 on the east side. Now, it wouldn't be done on purpose, it would just happen. Kind of the same way that Latin used to cover all of Europe. But over time, it diverged into many languages: Italian, Spanish, Flemish, French, and so on. So within this process, there will be something else that's happening as well. These new languages won't all develop at the same rate. The 60 languages on the western side would actually evolve much faster than the other 40. And this is actually what's happening today, although most people have no idea it's happening. So for example, I grew up in the Okanagan Valley, which is kind of in the middle of the mountains between coast and prairie. It's a place where language divergence, based on the geographic factors we know of, should happen somewhat rapidly. And in fact, the people there, in only the last 50 years or so, have been developing a distinct Okanagan accent. Now, it's not noticeable to most people from surrounding regions, but it is noticeable to linguistic researchers at the University of British Columbia. They've been studying it for about a decade and noticing the changes. And the change is indeed happening at a kind of a moderate pace. Now, if you drive 400 kilometers west of Vancouver, things are happening there much more quickly, where the geographic factors are stronger, more condensed, more powerful. And you can actually notice that young people, especially, have quite different accents in, say, North Vancouver compared to downtown or Richmond or Abbotsford or Port Coquitlam. Even though 100 years ago, everyone there used to sound pretty much the same. So the pace of change is linked with the timing of the larger society. Is it in a phase of centralization or decentralization, consolidation or fragmentation? We're coming out of consolidation and entering a phase of fragmentation, which means the emergence of new languages will actually speed up now. So for most of us, it's hard to imagine, but that's the general path forward for all of us across North America. Language divergence is happening everywhere. It's just happening faster in areas that are more geographically and biologically diverse. And if you're not sure where that is, you can use the proxy of biodiversity. So the most biologically diverse places in North America are found here on this map. Actually, it's for the states, but California, the American South, Appalachia, Texas, and Florida. So those are the real hot spots where languages will change the fastest. Now, back in the Okanagan Valley, and actually the Pacific Northwest region generally, basically BC, coastal side of Washington and Oregon, that's got a medium level of biodiversity. The least biologically diverse areas are the far north and the prairies. So the biological hotspots are going to have many new languages that don't even exist yet. The Pacific Northwest will get back up to about 60 new languages, and the prairies will hardly change at all. Now, the prairie folk will still have their bunny hugs, garages, and Texas gates, maybe for a few more unique words and phrases, but other than that, not much is going to change in the way they speak. Now, this is all a long way off, but we do see it already in the form of accents, and there's really some wonderful accents. My favorite being some of those from the South, especially South Carolina women. Ooh. But accents are just an intermediate stage on the path towards a new language. And new languages lead to new cultures, which lead to new outlooks on geopolitics. Of course, by the time we're all speaking different languages, Canada and the United States will only exist in history books. But in the meantime, on our way there, if you think the way I speak and the words I use now are incorrect, well, you have to understand I'm caught in a linguistic divergence trap that I can't get out of, and quite frankly, have no interest in doing so. It's the language I speak. So you language Nazis out there, you can just bugger off. I'm sure that's a phrase most of us still understand. Okay, so regardless or irregardless, that's all for today. Except one more thing. I talk a lot about these links between environment and culture in a book I wrote a long time ago called The Rules of Invasion: Why Europeans Naturally Invaded the New World. It needs a good editor and some updating, but otherwise, much of what I said back in 2016 when I first published it is now coming true. So check it out on Amazon, but otherwise, that's all for now. Okay, take care.